All right, good morning, guys. My name is Trey Laveroni. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm just going to ask that all of us just step into this moment. I know a lot of us got a lot of things going on. We got a new parsonage this Tuesday, and I was going by the parsonage real quick before coming to Junction and found out, I'm serving myself today. We had a flooded basement and all those things, so I know right now with the rain going on, like it's easy to get distracted about all these things, but I just ask that for the next 30 minutes or so, we just step into this time and ask for God to nudge us and encourage us and really build us up in this time. And those things are going to be there when we get done with this. And I hope that in this time we find some strength and some courage to step into those things. So what we've been going over the last 4 weeks, this is our final week of going over the series Wonder Women. And then next week we start Blood, Goats, and Freedom. If that doesn't draw you into what in the world are we talking about, I don't know what will. But the last 4 weeks we talked about Wonder Women, and what we've been looking at is the women in the scriptures, the women throughout history that have shaped Christianity. And it's not one of those things where we're like, hey, women, take a look, this is what you need to be like. But no, this is for all of us, men, or male and female, young and old. This is for all of us to be encouraged by these women of faith and how they stepped into courage and how they had strength and all those different things from God and how they said yes to the call that God has on their lives. And we can all be inspired by their lives. And so the first week, what we did is we looked at Lydia, who was a wealthy woman from Europe and the first woman to become a Christian in Europe, and she started a church out of her home. And then the second week, Aaron talked about Susanna Wesley, the mother of Methodism, and the mother of John and Charles Wesley. And then week 3, Rick talked about Sarah, the mother of the Jewish faith, the mother of the Christian faith, and in a way, the stepmom of the Islam faith as well. And then last week, we talked about Mary Magdalene, and Rick shared about Mary Magdalene and her life and how she was in Jesus' inner circle, and Jesus revealed himself to her after the resurrection, or after he resurrected. She was the first that he revealed himself. He revealed himself to. And so I just want to encourage us. There's a section in the program. There's a notes section. We live in the 21st century. We got notes in our phones, right? We can use those. I'll trust that you're in the notes and not just news feed scrolling, whatever. I can tell by your thumb, by the way. But anyways, I just want to encourage you, take notes, jot some things down. When you leave here, I hope that God encourages you in this time to be able to face whatever you're going through or to be able to say yes to whatever God's calling you to. And so today I'm excited to tell you a story. Today we're going to be talking about the one female that actually has a whole book dedicated to her in the Old Testament, and that is Esther. And I'm going to try to walk through this and tell the story of Esther, but I encourage you, when you get home this week, it's a quick 30-minute read, and so go through the book yourself and jot some things down of how it speaks to you, because there's some things I just can't hit on in this short of a time, but there's so much stuff that God speaks through Esther's story. And Esther is actually the only book in the Bible where God's name is not mentioned one time. God's name is not mentioned one time throughout the whole book of Esther, but if we look, we see God's thumbprint through the whole thing. We see God working and moving and in the flow of Esther's life and Mordecai and all these different figures. And it kind of reminds me, there's a Saint Francis of Assisi out of Italy. He had a quote in the 1200s saying, "Preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words." And that's kind of what I see in this book. Even though God's never mentioned, we just see it through their lives and their lifestyle and how they lived. And so this scene, this book, it's drawn out of a certain time period in history between 486 BC and 465 BC. So it was not that long ago, right? It was about 2,000 plus years ago, 2,000, almost 2,500 years ago. And what's crazy about this is the scene opens up with King Xerxes. Now, some of us know who King Xerxes... Okay, does anyone know what movie? Raise your hand if you know what movie that is. We have a few. 300, right? There's King Leonidas, and there's King Xerxes. And so he is the king of Persia. And now, the movie is very, Hollywood. Let's just own it. There's not a lot of historical backing on a lot of it, but it's it gets you pumped up, okay? So that's the king that's going to be a main character and is one of the main characters in the book of Esther. And he was the king of Persia, and the Persian Empire, the Persian kingdom, was 127 provinces at that time. And so we can see how big that empire was at that time. This would have been before the Roman Empire. And so, like, whenever we read Scripture and we see Jesus was even though he was in Israel, they were ruled by Rome. That's kind of what's going on here, except for Israel, the Jews are with them in Susa. And so this is a very, did I say Susa? I think Susa, sorry. But very big empire, very powerful empire. Wasn't a very long-standing empire. I kind of think we've been around for a long time, but if you really think about it, the United States of America has been around for a short period of time, and that's kind of where they were at, a very short empire, even though very powerful. And so this king decided that he was going to throw a huge party. He was known as a very generous king, and so he threw a huge party with all the wine anyone could ask for, and he was going to do it for a short 6 months. And so in this book of Esther, it starts off with the king throwing a 6-month party. Now, he brought in all the leaders of the kingdom and all these different nobles, and he wanted to show them how God was working and not how God was working, but all the things that he had and what he had brought into his kingdom. And then after 6 months, it wasn't enough. He wanted to throw one more 7-day party that was even better than the 6 months. And so during that 7-day party, he's had a little too much to drink, a little too much wine, and he comes up with this brilliant idea for his queen to turn into something he shows off, and not like what you might want for him to show off, just her beauty, and that was it. He just wanted her to show up with her crown and walk around to show how beautiful she was, to show that he had the most beautiful woman in the world. Now, we got to remember, this is not 2019, and that women were viewed as property, and that she would have been property to the king, and I'm so glad that we are not in that place today. We still got a long ways to go, I think, but we are not in that place today of the equality of men and women, but this was a completely different time. And here's where it shifts. The king sends his 7 eunuchs, 7 servants to go get the queen, and guess what she says? No. I am not going to be some show horse for you or whatever you think this is, where I just walk around and show off my beauty and all these things. Like, that is not what I'm going to do. She has an ounce of dignity. She does not want to do it. And the king panics. Because, one, this just never happened for the king. And most of the time, this didn't happen for men, period. And so the king panics and goes, he calls in all his nobles. He had nobles all around that he would draw influence from and all those different things. And he brings them in. He goes, guys, hey, I got a situation at home we need to talk about. I told her to come, and she said no. What do I do? And they were panicking because the nobles go, dude, you need to figure this out, because if your wife says no, my wife's going to find out that she can say no. And then if our wives say no, then all the women of the kingdom are going to start saying no to their spouses. And it's going to be it's going to be a show. Let's just say that. And so they all panic, and they realize they have to punish the queen or do something to the queen so that all the women don't just go about saying no and stop submitting to their husbands and all this in this patriarchal society. And so what they decide to do, one of the nobles decides, what you should do is you should remove the crown from her head. She should no longer be queen, and she should be removed completely from your presence. So she should never be able to see you again. And the king, being the bright king he is, goes, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. Like I said, we're not supporting this. This is just what happened, okay? And so the queen is no longer the queen. She most likely is still his wife. It's just for the rest of her life and the rest of his life, they will never see each other again, okay? And that means, guess what? There's a opening for queen. And guess what he does? He goes to Tinder and finds his queen. And so, guys, that was a joke, sorry. That was terrible, apparently. But what he decides to do is to find his next queen. He decides that he is going to have a beauty pageant. And so he's going to have his servants and his eunuchs and all these different people travel the kingdom to find the most beautiful women in the world for them to bring before him, for him to choose his next queen. Now, guess what the process is for this? It's not oh, there she is. Now go show him to the king. No, it was they had to, in order to go in the beauty pageant, they had to go under 12 months of beauty treatment before they could even be seen by the queen, or by the king. So it's so crazy. So here's what they have to do. They have to go under 6 months with oil of myrrh, and then after that 6 months, then they have 6 months of perfumes and cosmetics. After those 12 months, then they can be presented to the king. Now, long story short, this is where Esther enters the scene. She's chosen as one of the women to go into this beauty pageant, and she wins. She becomes the queen of Persia, and it's important for us to know that this was a woman of the Jewish faith as well. And so, to kind of go to her backstory a little bit, Esther's parents died whenever she was a kid, and so she was raised by her cousin Mordecai, and Mordecai was the father figure in her life, her whole life, and Mordecai, to stay close to Esther and to continue to want to protect her and be with her, he picks up a job as a palace guard. So he picks up a job as a palace guard so that he can be around the palace, close to her, be able to be there for her. It's not like she needs anything anymore. She's the queen of Persia, but he still wants to be able to be there for her. And while he's there, there's a quick story that's important. Mordecai is there, and he hears two of the leaders of the palace guard and two of the leaders of the Persian kingdom plotting to kill the king. And when he finds this out, he passes it through the ranks so that the king finds out, and they put to death those two people, and there enters a new character named Haman. Now, I practice this a lot by sounding Jamaican and saying Haman, but it just isn't working, as you can tell. No laughter. But Haman is this power-hungry guy that doesn't care what he's got to do to be able to absorb as much influence and as much power as possible. And he's the number 2 guy in command under the king, okay? Now, Haman is walking out of the palace, and because he's number 2 influence, whenever he's walking through the kingdom, people are supposed to bow down when they see him. And so it was kind of like a reverence thing. And so he's walking out of the kingdom. He sees all the palace guards bowing down except for one. And guess who that is? Mordecai. He looks over, and Mordecai is standing there, and he is furious because this man will not bow down to him. Now, there's multiple different ideas behind why Mordecai doesn't bow down. One of the main ideas is he viewed it as an idol, like as if by him bowing down, he was saying that this man is equal to God or greater to God, and he was not going to do that. He was not going to participate in that. And so with that came great punishment. Haman was not just mad at Mordecai, but he decided because of what Mordecai did, he needed to eliminate the Jews as a whole. And so you have this whole people group that because of one individual and what this one individual did needed to go because of the disrespect that he received from them. And so he tells the king, hey, here's what happened. There's this one guy. He doesn't say names or anything. He says, there's this one guy that did this. I think him, along with his whole people group, need to go. And the king's like, yeah, he disrespected you, which means he kind of disrespected me, so that's fine. And he wrote out a law, and he said, on March 7th, now, they didn't use March 7th, they used a Persian calendar, but on March 7th, is modern day, March 7th, all Jewish people should be eliminated. Now, March 7th was 11 months away. And so it took a long time to push out these laws because there wasn't texting, there wasn't email, there wasn't quick instant messenger, there was letters that had to be translated to different languages, distributed throughout the whole kingdom. I mean, he was overseeing multiple different nations and languages. And so laws took forever to pass. And so when this happened, the Jews go, oh, we're going to be put to death. Oh, but we have to wait for 11 months, so this is going to be fun, But it was one of those tension moments. And so Mordecai, even though he stands behind what he did, is terrified. At that time, the Jews, the way that the Jewish people would mourn, they would wrap sackcloths around themselves, and they would put ashes over each other and weep out to God, mourning and crying out to God about whatever was going on in their lives. And so Esther finds out Mordecai is doing this, and so she reaches out, she sends one of her servants to Mordecai to go, hey, what's going on? And so Mordecai shares what's taking place in his life and in the Jewish people's lives and what's going to end up happening to Esther. And he asked Esther, hey, can you talk to your husband? Can you remove this law and talk to your husband? And for us today, we think, well, yeah, that would be simple. That would be easy. She would just go home, say, hey, can you do this thing you do where you write a new law that eliminates this? But she tells Mordecai, she goes, hey, I haven't been summoned in 30 days. Now, I asked my wife if she would like this, and she said, actually, that wouldn't be bad sometimes if I did be summoned because I could take a break from you every once in a while. But it was one of those things where he had to summon her for her to be able to talk to him. And here's what would happen if not. There's two things. So if he didn't summon her and she went to him, no matter if she was his wife, no matter if it was a noble, no matter whoever it was in his life, if he did not summon you and you went to him, there were two things that would happen. There would be one where he would raise up a golden scepter, and that meant bring whatever you want to bring to me. The other would be you're gone, bye-bye, and you be put to death. So there's two options here, cup up or death to me, Esther. And so what Mordecai is asking Esther to do for us today is like, that's not that hard of a thing, but in her situation, this is life or death. And you think, surely he wouldn't kill his wife. Things were different. Things were much different. And so Mordecai responds to Esther and says, hey, make whatever choice you want to make. I have faith in God that if you do not do this, that God will bring someone to help the Jewish nation and the Jewish faith out in the future. It's just by that time, me, you, and everyone else will be gone. So do whatever you want to do, we'll all be gone, including you. And then he asked a question that for Christians and for the Jewish faith has been asked of people from the moment it left Mordecai's lips. And here's the question. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Now I want to pause in the story for a moment and ask, what is that thing for you? What is that nudge that God's been placing in your life constantly, asking you to step into? For some of you in here, you're so mad right now that I just asked that because you know what I'm talking about. You know that nudge, and you didn't want to hear about it today. The thing is, I know whenever I'm feeling those nudges, I usually don't say no. What I do is I wait it out, right? It's like, God, I'm not saying no. Let me pray about it. How long until I can wait till it's not an option anymore? You know, we do that thing where we say we're praying, but really we're just waiting until it's not there so we don't have to take that risk, take that step. And so the reason so often we do that is because so often those nudges that God gives us requires a sacrifice or requires something out of us that we're struggling to give. Whether it's a financial sacrifice, whether it's some sort of sacrifice on our comfort, whether it's some sort of sacrifice on our dreams or our gifts or our talents, we're like, man, I don't know if I want to make that sacrifice. We maybe want the reward, but we don't want to go through the sacrifice that's required of it. You know, it reminds me of like I don't know a single person that doesn't want to be in good shape. You know, like I really haven't met, yeah, I'd love to just walk a half mile and just be dying. Like, I've never heard anyone in my 20s, I'm 28, not in good shape and not happy about it, but I didn't know that jumping on a trampoline was exercise until I entered my 20s. And when you're a kid, you're like, that's not exercise. But then you're in your 20s and realize, oh, shoot, that's exercise. Like, you get out of breath quick, and your muscles hurt, and it's weird. But, you know, the thing is, like, I want to be in shape. I want to be in better shape. But I want the end result, but I don't want to say the yes to the gym or yes to the walking or yes to the running to get there. Or I don't know anyone that's 28 that goes, yeah, I want money pushed back for retirement. Like, I would love to have money pushed back for retirement. But then so many of us are not saying yes to putting that money back so that when we turn, by my time, probably 85 for retirement. Or I have so many friends, they're like, man, I want to get married. Oh, what are you doing? I mean, have you met anyone? Have you reached out? Oh, I'm just waiting. Bro, you're not getting married then. Like, that's just not happening if you're not reaching out and trying to date or pursue someone. Or, man, I feel like God's calling me to be a teacher or a welder or this or that. Well, how's school going? How's the trade school going? Well, I mean, I'm not doing that. Like, I think God's calling me that. I'll get to it. Like, everything that God calls us to requires a yes first. So we have to step towards that. And so, guess what Esther does? She says, hey, I want you to bring together all of the Jews, all the people of the Jewish faith. I want me and my servants to spend 3 days fasting and praying, and I'll go talk to the king at the end of that 3 days. And so she fasts and prays along with all the people of the Jewish faith. And at the end of the 3 days, she goes up to the king, and her heart racing, her palms probably sweaty, and walks up and he raises the cup. And he says, in fact, he says this, my queen, what can I do for you? I will grant you up to half the kingdom. Now, maybe I'm selfish. I would have been like, yeah, I'll take that. But I got one more thing also. Like, why did she not say yes to that? I don't know. But she says to him, and this means the king was in a good mood, but Esther asked, if it pleases you, let you and Haman attend my banquet tonight. And so the king and Haman attend the banquet that night together. It's just the king, Haman, and the queen. And the king says again, my queen, what can I do for you? I will grant you up to half the kingdom. Instead of saying yes to that, she says, Esther responds, if it pleases you, let you and Haman attend my banquet tomorrow night, and I will tell you what this is all about. And so Haman, Esther, and the king have spent this night at a banquet together, and Haman was the only one there, and so he's on a high horse right now. He is so pumped and excited that he's been a part of this, and not only that, but he gets to come to another one the next day. And so he's in a good mood, and as he's leaving the palace, everyone's bowing down except for one person, Mordecai. And immediately, instead of just moving on from it, he becomes enraged. And so he decides that on March 7th, when this day happens, tonight I am building a pole 75 foot tall that I will put Mordecai on. Pretty dark. And so they work on that pole to put Mordecai on that. Now, something else is happening this night that is crucial. And here's what's the king that night after he leaves the banquet, the guy is struggling to go to sleep. And so they don't have Tylenol PM back then. And so what he does to help him go to rest is he has a servant read a book about himself to him. Pretty interesting. And so it's called the Book of King. He's the king, so it's a book about his story. And so this is his lullaby. Like, once again, I asked Jess if she would do this, and I didn't get a comment. So she was like, anyways, this is pretty interesting, okay? This was when he went to bed. And so that night, this servant is reading him a story, and as the servant's reading him a story, it's a story about a palace guard that helped save the king's life by telling him something happened, or that they were planning to kill him. And so the king, thinking of himself as a generous king, realized, oh shoot, did I ever do anything for that guy? Like, did I ever help him out at all? And the servants were like, no, you never did anything. He's like, oh man, I got to do something for him tomorrow. And so, that's Mordecai. And so the next morning, Haman shows up in a cheerful, good mood because he's about to go to the banquet again. And the king goes, hey, if I were to honor someone, what should I do? If I were to honor someone I respect, what should I do that's done something for me? Haman thinks that he's talking about him. And so Haman comes up with this awesome plan. Here's what it is. Well, Your Honor, you should dress him in one of your royal robes. You should bring one of your finest horses, one that you yourself has ridden, and have one of your most noble officials lead him on the horse through the city square, announcing, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. And the king goes, that is a great idea. Go get Mordecai. And Haman's like, wait, what? Not only is it not Haman, but it's the very man that Haman just had his servants spend all night building a pole for. And so he goes, hey, don't leave out a thing. Do that. And so guess who is the noble person leading the charge for this? Haman. And I think this, well, I'll get to that later. So they go through this, and Haman returns just humiliated, like so frustrated with what just took place. And that night, they come back to the banquet where it's the king, the queen, and Haman. And the king says, once again, my queen, what can I do for you? I will grant you up to half the kingdom. And with a deep breath, Esther says, if it pleases you, I ask you to spare the lives of myself and my people. An order has gone out to kill us all. Please, there must be something you can do to spare us. And the king, furious, demanded answers and said, who did such a thing? And she goes, he did. Haman, he is our enemy and wicked adversary. Now, the king is furious and storms out of the garden, and Haman realizes in that moment he's done for. Like the only person that could save his life is Esther, and so he starts begging that Esther please accept his forgiveness and all these different things, and the king comes back and places Haman on the very pole planned for Mordecai. I think there is, the literal thing's a little dark, but I think there is a story in there that so often in the things we use to bury others often buries ourselves. Whether it's our negativity or all those other things, like so often that's a story. That the very thing we try to use against others gets used against us. And so after the rage, the king says, hey, I can't undo the law that was done. I stamped it. It was stamped and it was in my name. But I will let you and Mordecai come up with a new law. And so the new law, all it was to say, Jews, you can defend yourselves. You can defend yourselves. And so before March 7th comes along, the Jews start to unite and come together. And people afraid of the Jews and afraid of the Jewish God start joining the Jewish faith because they didn't want to be eliminated. And so the very thing that was meant to persecute the Jews helped build up the kingdom. Once again, something we see often. So on March 7th, the Jews across the kingdom unite together and defend themselves. And on March 8th, they feast. And March 8th, from that point forward, became the festival of Purim. And this would have been something that even existed whenever Jesus walked the earth 470, 80 years later. Still to that day. This is the thing, guys. When we look at these 5 women we've talked about, there is nothing different or special or unusual or any unusual talents about each and every one of them. None of them were bit by a spider and then became some superhero. Like, they were all just normal human beings who used God's strength and courage to say yes to whatever God was calling them to do. So I want to ask again, what is it that God is calling you to say yes to? Maybe it's something you've been sitting on, you've been feeling a nudge, but you've been fearful to take that step. I want to ask, what's holding you back? Don't let fear hold you back. For the rest of us, we might not know what that thing is. We might not know what that nudge is. So I want to ask you to say yes to the small steps that God asks us to take steps towards. We're Methodist, which means we're methodical. We do things in order to experience God. Like if I wait for me to serve my wife and kids, there's going to be good days and there's going to be bad weeks, right? I become very centered sometimes. But if I put methodical goals in front of me where I serve my wife once a day or twice a day or whatever, or my kids, then in that, I start to become transformed and start to do it without even realizing it. And so what I want to ask you to say yes to is say yes to spending time in here. Say yes to 5 verses a day, or if you go through a chapter a day, you'll go through the whole Bible in 3 years. That sounds like a lot, but it's not. Say yes to knowing and understanding what this thing says, asking questions of it, seeing what it talks about. Say yes to giving thanksgiving to God. I try to 5 times a day say thank you for something. In the morning, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and in the evening. And it's amazing when you say thankful, when you do those practices, you become more positive in everything else in your life. Do acts of kindness. Set a goal to do acts of kindness. Say, yes, I will do 3 acts of kindness today. Whether letting someone in front of you in a line or looking at the Walmart associate's tag to say, how are you doing, Cindy? Or whatever it might be. Do those acts of kindness. Be generous people. I'm going to give 5 generous tips this month. Whatever it might be, set goals to say yes to so that you can experience the richness in God by saying yes to the small things. Because once you say yes to the small things, then you'll be able to say yes to the big things. Maybe you're in a business right now and you're feeling a call to a nonprofit, but man, that pays a lot less. Todd Taylor, our director of children's ministry, when he accepted his call to children's ministry 15 years ago, 70% pay cut. And he said yes, and so many kids are thankful for that yes. Or maybe your yes is knowing that there's a child or a teenager that doesn't have a place to stay. And maybe you're that temporary comfort or place or that permanent place for them. And that's your yes. But guys, the yeses for the big things become so much easier when we say yes to the everyday acts that God calls us to be. For Lydia, it was saying yes to opening her home to strangers, to build a church that would spread throughout Europe. For Susanna, it was raising her kids with values and pushing the boundaries of women at that time. For Sarah, it was saying yes to being patient and waiting and messing up, but still remaining patient after that until God gave her the promise that He said He would. And for Esther, saying yes was putting her very life on the line. So I'm going to ask again, what is it that God's calling you to do? Would you pray?